The Siege of Rhodes, 1522, the Knights Hospitallers' last stand. Imagine if 700 knights and a few thousand civilians stood against the mightiest army on earth for 6 months, turning a small Mediterranean island into the graveyard of empires and the stage for the most heroic last stand in medieval history. Welcome to Ancient Battlefield. Today we're exploring the epic finale of the crusading era, where the Knights Hospitaller fought their greatest battle against Suleiman the Magnificent's overwhelming forces, knowing that defeat meant the end of their ancient order forever. The Knights Hospitaller had ruled Rhodes since 1309, transforming the island into the most formidable fortress in the Mediterranean. For over 2 centuries, they had been the scourge of Ottoman shipping, launching raids that captured Turkish vessels and disrupted Muslim trade routes. But here's what's truly shocking. By 1522, they faced an enemy that had grown tired of their defiance and was determined to end their power forever. Suleiman the Magnificent, fresh from his conquest of Belgrade and at the height of Ottoman power, assembled the largest invasion force ever directed against a single island. Over 200,000 warriors, including elite janissaries, Turkish engineers, and the most advanced siege artillery in the world, prepared to crush the Knights' resistance once and for all. The Knights Hospitaller defending Rhodes numbered perhaps 700 knights, supported by a few thousand soldiers and armed civilians. Grandmaster Philippe Villiers de l'Isle Adam commanded this tiny force that everyone knew was facing impossible odds. What happened next will blow your mind. They decided to fight anyway, knowing that retreat meant abandoning everything their order had stood for across centuries. Here's where it gets really interesting. Rhodes wasn't just a fortress, it was the most sophisticated military installation in the Mediterranean. The Knights had spent 2 centuries perfecting their defenses, building massive walls, underground tunnels, and artillery positions that could theoretically hold off any assault. But no one had ever tested them against an army this size. The Ottoman fleet that approached Rhodes in June 1522 was so vast it darkened the horizon. Over 400 ships carrying Suleiman's massive army, their siege cannons, and enough supplies for an extended campaign. Can you imagine being a defender on the walls of Rhodes, watching this armada arrive, and knowing that your 700 knights were all that stood between the Ottomans and total victory? Suleiman's siege strategy was methodical and ruthless. His engineers began digging massive trenches that crept closer to the walls each day, while his great cannons, some weighing over 15 tons, began their systematic destruction of Rhodes's fortifications. But that's not the most amazing part. The Knights had prepared for exactly this kind of siege. The truth is even more incredible when you consider the defensive innovations the Knights employed. They had developed counter-mining techniques, explosive devices, and coordinated artillery positions that turned every Ottoman advance into a costly nightmare. The defenders fought with the desperation of men who knew they were making history's last stand. The crisis came in September, when Ottoman sappers successfully exploded massive mines under the walls, creating breaches large enough for thousands of troops to pour through. Suleiman ordered general assaults that should have overwhelmed the tiny garrison, but here's where it gets really interesting. The Knights held every breach through sheer courage and tactical brilliance. Grandmaster Villiers de l'Isle Adam proved himself one of history's greatest defensive commanders. He personally led counterattacks, appeared wherever the fighting was fiercest, and somehow maintained morale among defenders who were outnumbered nearly 300 to 1. What happened next will blow your mind. His leadership was so inspiring that even Ottoman sources praised his courage. But the arithmetic of siege warfare was inexorable. Every day brought new casualties the Knights couldn't replace, while Suleiman's massive army could absorb enormous losses and continue fighting. By December, the walls of Rhodes were in ruins, the defenders were exhausted, and everyone knew the end was approaching. The final crisis came when Ottoman artillery opened a massive breach in the main wall, and Turkish assault troops poured into the city. For several hours, it seemed like Rhodes would fall to a final storm, but here's what's truly shocking. The Knights fought so fiercely in street-to-street combat that they drove the Ottomans back yet again. Suleiman himself was reportedly amazed by the Knights' resistance. His losses had been staggering, Contemporary sources suggest that over 50,000 Ottoman warriors had died trying to capture Rhodes. But that's not the most amazing part. He offered the knights terms of surrender that were almost unprecedented in their generosity. The truth is even more incredible than the military resistance suggests. Suleiman recognized that he was facing warriors whose courage had earned respect even from their enemies. Rather than massacre the defenders as was customary, he offered them safe passage, the right to take their weapons and treasures, and time to evacuate all civilians who wished to leave. Here's where it gets really interesting from a chivalric perspective. The final negotiations between Suleiman and Grand Master Villiers became a legendary example of honor between enemies. Both leaders recognized they had participated in something extraordinary, a siege that had pushed human courage to its absolute limits. The evacuation of Rhodes on January 1, 1523, marked the end of an era. The Knights Hospitaller, after holding their island fortress for over 2 centuries, sailed away with their banners flying and their honor intact. They would eventually establish themselves on Malta, but Rhodes represented their greatest stand against overwhelming odds. The human cost of the siege was staggering on both sides. The Knights lost perhaps half their number, while Ottoman casualties may have reached 60,000 or more. The 6-month siege had become one of the bloodiest conflicts of the 16th century, all fought over a single Mediterranean island. But that's not the most amazing part. The Siege of Rhodes 1522 proved that, even in an age of gunpowder and massive armies, individual courage and tactical skill could still achieve the impossible. 700 knights had held off the Ottoman Empire for 6 months, inflicting casualties that Suleiman's army would feel for years. Can you imagine the psychological impact this siege had across Europe? The Knights' resistance proved that Ottoman power, despite its apparent invincibility, could be challenged by determined defenders willing to fight to the death for their beliefs. The Siege of Rhodes 1522. The Knights Hospitallers' last stand remains history's greatest example of a small force achieving immortal glory through desperate resistance against impossible odds. It showed that sometimes the most important victories aren't about winning, but about fighting so courageously that even your enemies honor your memory. Today, as we study asymmetric warfare and the power of motivated defenders, we can learn from the Knights Hospitallers' example that superior numbers and technology can't always overcome superior courage, tactical skill, and unbreakable determination to defend what you believe in. What do you think was the most crucial factor in the Knights' legendary resistance? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more heroic last stands from ancient battlefields.